So today we have a couple of different things for you. We're going to start with Kara, who will be sharing finance and budget information, and then we'll go into monitoring and compliance, and we'll finish off with the POP report and the MSG report. Thank you so much, Tracy and Krista, for helping us today with this presentation. So Kara, if you would like to get started with us, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Alrighty, so welcome to the Fiscal 101. I'm going to be teaching. I'm Kara McVeigh. I'm your grant manager for TWC's Adult Education and Literacy Grant. This presentation is designed to give you a high-level overview of the AEL financial operations within your grants, and it's provided to AEL staff at the local level as well as at a director level. So we're going to go ahead and jump right on in. The objectives today we're going to cover are the AEL budget funding streams, administrative costs versus program costs, cost categories and what goes where, data accuracy and why it's important, and to know where to find information when needed. At the end of the presentation, you'll be able to identify all these things and have a little bit more knowledge on how all this works. So, the Texas Workforce Commission uses its own financial manual for grants and contracts, or as we refer to it as the FMGC. There's a link to it just specifically on the Texas Workforce Commission website, and we encourage you to take a look at it if you have some questions on things, or if you're just not sure about something. And as always, if you have any questions on if something is allowable, you can always send a message to the AEL contracts email address, and Lori or myself will research and answer and get back with you. The FMGC, it compiles federal, state, and agency requirements that apply to recipients and subrecipients of Texas Workforce Commission funds. This includes Uniform Grant Management Standards and the Office of Budget and Management circulars. So one of the most common questions that Lori or I get is, what is allowable for my grant? Well, in order for it to be an allowable cost, it must meet the general allowability criteria established by the OMB circulars and or UGMs, or the Uniform Grant Management Standards. A cost must meet very general criteria in order to be considered allowable under a federal grant or state award. It needs to be necessary and reasonable for proper and efficient performance and administration of the award. It also needs to be applicable to the award under the provisions of applicable OMB circulars and UGMs standards, as well as be well documented. All grantees are required to maintain and furnish, upon request, a cost allocation plan specific to their institution. The cost allocation plan must be adequately documented and must include all costs that will be claimed as allocated costs under the federal or state awards. For more information on the cost principles and cost allocation plans in the FMGC, you can always take a look at that. You are welcome to visit the Texas Workforce Commission website and do a search for the FMGC there. In the search bar at the top of the page, there's also information on the Texas State Comptroller's Office, which issues the Uniform Grant Management Standards, and it applies to all grants funded with state funds issued by state agencies. Okay, so we're briefly going to look at two important AEL acronyms before we continue to the funding streams. These are CEDAR and AFLA. So you're going to hear me use the word CEDAR a lot. It is written as CDER, and it's pronounced as cedar, like the tree that everybody has allergies with at least once in a while here in Central Texas. Those of you in West Texas, I hope you don't have as much bad cedar fever as we do. The CDER stands for Cash Draw and Monthly Expenditure Reporting. It allows authorized vendors, quote unquote, to process cash draws, adjustments, refunds, and expenditure reports on grant contracts online. The system automatically validates all requests before submission for swift, accurate processing and payment. CEDAR is where the fiscal agent at your institution enters the monthly expenditures and draws down cash needed at the local level. There are 11 short training modules in CEDAR for instruction on how to use the system. It is strongly recommended that AEL directors at the local level have read-only access to CEDAR. All TWC AEL accounting is done through the CEDAR system, and we will be referring to CEDAR throughout this module. For more information about CEDAR access, please contact your TWC grant manager through the AEL email, or AEL contracts email, excuse me. Okay, so what is AFLA? You hear us talk about this all the time. It stands for the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act. This is specific to Title II of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, of 2014. It's the principal source, the WIOA funding is the principal source of federal funding for states for adult education programs. The purpose of AFLA's basic state grant program is to assist adults in becoming literate, obtaining the knowledge and skills necessary for employment and self-sufficiency, obtaining the necessary education and skills to become full partners in the educational development of their children, and completing secondary education or its equivalent. While there are different sections within AFLA, AEL is funded by two of them. There's AFLA Federal, or also known as AFLA 231, and Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education, also known as AFLA 243. We'll explain more about these funding sources in the next few slides. So AFLA 231 funds must be used to establish or operate programs that provide adult education and literacy activities. These include basic adult education, workplace literacy, English as a second language without civics education, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later, workforce preparation activities, and integrated education and trainings. All AEL eligible students can be funded with your 231 funds. In CEDAR, AFLA 231 funds are reflected as AEL Combined. AEL Combined consists of your 231 funds, which are federal money, your state general revenue matching funds, and TANF funding. TWC matches the TANF eligibility on the back end, and no additional work on TANF eligibility is necessary at the local level. AFLA 225 is a subset of your AFLA 231 funds and is used to dedicate 231 funds to your corrections activities as a line item in CEDAR under your AEL Combined. Section 225 is not a separate funding source, but it's a portion of the 231 funds that must be used for programs to conduct adult education and literacy activities for incarcerated or other institutionalized participants. Okay, so what all does that mean in CEDAR? Well, on the previous slide, we discussed AFLA 231 or AEL Combined. The AEL Combined cost category is shown in the left column of this table, and the AEL or the AFLA funding classification is on the right. AFLA 231 funds are the primary funds in the AEL Combined cost category in CEDAR. All AEL services may be charged to the AEL Combined category. However, TWC requests that all corrections expenses be recorded in the corrections or AFLA 225 section in CEDAR. No more than 20% of the overall AFLA allocation from the Department of Education may be used for corrections. Entering all corrections activity in this section allows TWC to keep track of those expenditures. Allowable activities in corrections include basic AEL transition for corrections, IETs within corrections, and intensive services reentry. There are also professional development funds that are specific to AEL staff development. And these funds are considered AFLA 231 funds. However, no student services are allowed to be allocated to this cost category. Now that we've discussed the AEL combined category, let's move on to the IET EL Civics cost category. So another category of AEL allocations is AFLA 243, or IETs and EL Civics in CEDAR. You will see that IELCE, IET/EL Civics, and IET EL Civics are used interchangeably in this model. In order to use your AFLA 243 funds, EL Civics services must include instruction in literacy, English as a second language, and the rights and responsibilities of citizenship and civic participation, and may include workforce training. The inclusion of the rights and responsibilities of citizenship and civic participation is what distinguishes this from services provided to English language learners under AEL Combined or 231 services. WEOS Section 243 states that integrated EL Civics funds require that the program service approach include EL Civics services in combination with IET for participants for whom IET services are appropriate. In CEDAR, all EL Civics funding is recorded as IET ELC for all participants in this category, whether there is an IET component or not. For those placed in training services, there is a line item in CEDAR under IET EL Civics specifically for training expenses. Your best available resource for spending of AFLA 243 funds would be AEL letter 0416 change 1, which can be found on the TWC website at the twc.texas.gov. And you can just search for AEL letters or AEL 0416 change 1. Okay, so what does this really look like in CEDAR? Well, the table on the slide is what this pretty much looks like. You've got your administration line, your program costs, and your training costs. In the cost category, there are 3 subcategories: admin, program, and training. Specifically, the activities to be applied to the IET EL Civic cost category are those activities considered for 243 funds. Those activities are integrated IET EL Civics and EL Civics EL Civics. Just like in AEL Combined, there is a program cost line and a training cost line. If you are implementing an integrated IET EL Civics course with training, then those training related costs would be recorded under training costs. Now that we've discussed the 2 funding streams, we're going to take a closer look at how costs can be classified. Things are going to look different for the year 4 allocations within CEDAR because we're not necessarily going to have the 2 separate funding lines in CEDAR. I'm still working on getting information and getting a mock-up of what that will look like at this time while we're processing the year 4 amendments. So I don't have a whole lot to share at this moment. I will say that on the July 16th fiscal call, we will have all of this ironed out and have a better understanding and better descriptors of what this is going to look like. Essentially, what we've done is we've taken away a lot of the complication and tried to make it as simplified as possible. So simplification is going to win in the end. And if there's any fiscal folks on this call, feel free to message me after the session and we can talk offline a little bit more about what all that's going to look like. We're still going to be keeping things within federal reporting requirements. So you won't have to worry too much about that because we are aware of federal reporting that you all will have to keep track of in your fiscal departments. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the difference between what an admin cost is and what a program cost is and how to discern where something would go. Unfortunately, there's no universal rule for classifying certain costs as whether they're admin or program under every accounting system. Therefore, it's essential that each item of cost incurred for the same purpose be treated consistently in like circumstances, either as administrative or indirect costs or program or direct costs. So, admin costs are typically function-based and not related to the direct provisions of AEL services. TWC considers direct costs to be costs that can be identified specifically with a particular final cost objective. TWC defines indirect costs as costs that are A, incurred for a common or joint purpose benefiting more than one cost objective, and B, not readily assignable to the cost objective specifically benefited without effort disproportionate to the results achieved. So the next slide's going to go a little more into detail of what admin costs are. So your admin costs are your expenses that are associated with supporting your AEL grant at your institution and are not directly related to student services. This could be charges from your institution's business office for managing the accounting on the grant, procurements, and purchasing functions, or costs that are associated for processing payroll. If you have questions about admin costs, please reach out to your TWC grant manager. You may find more information on administrative costs in both financial manual for grants and contracts and the Uniform Grant Management Standards. So admin costs are really the things that you all can get charged for from other departments within your institution. When I used to work at a community college, I did help a little bit with some of the accounting within my department. And one thing I saw was I remember recording costs or expenditures for print shop services that were offered or that were rendered. So tests that were printed, flyers for advertising for other things in our department were charged. So anything that the print shop did for my department, we had to, pay them a little bit out of our budget every month, 2 weeks. I don't remember how frequently that was. I just remember reporting the costs. So that's where admin costs come in. It's basically just the support of the AEL program versus the actual running of the program itself. All right, so what are program costs? These are the non-administrative charges associated with making your grant successful. Your payroll and fringe benefits for staff and instructors are considered program costs. Equipment, which is defined by TWC as high dollar items that are $5,000 or more per unit, may be charged as program costs, but you have to have prior approval from TWC to make that purchase. So if you're going to spend something more than $5,000 per item, you got to get our permission first. Supplies needed to carry out your grant performance. These I consider to be consumables or technology purchases at less than $5,000 per unit. Something specific would be your distance learning licenses and your remote learning licenses for your staff, for students. Those are considered consumables because the way I'm looking at it is you're paying for a code from a company. That code is only good for one person. And so you give it to that person uses it, it's no longer good. So it's a consumable. That's really how we define it. Another thing for consumables, pens, paper clips, highlighters, dry erase markers for dry erase boards, chalk if you still have chalkboards, etc. Okay, you can also spend money on technology, the less than $5,000 per unit. You can do this you can get Chromebooks, hotspots, laptops, all of that is considered supplies and it's listed under program costs. Travel for programmatic purposes are also an allowable program cost, as well as other costs associated with the execution of work within the scope of the grant. Typically, whenever we get questions, the questions are about, well, how would I define this, or how would I pay for this? What can this be allocated as? And that's really where Lori and I have to do some research sometimes. Sometimes there's federal guidance and federal regulations we have to research. Sometimes there's state regulations or language that we have to go research. There's a lot to it. I know that I got a couple of questions last week and I just did not know the answer. And I had to come back and say, we're going to have to take a closer look at this and get back with you because it was going to take some time. But yes.
Kara, we do have a question. Jody's asking, can you elaborate about advertising costs?
No. And only reason I'm saying no is because I have to go back and refamiliarize myself with the specific guidance about that. General advertising costs for your program, there's specific criteria that it has to meet, but advertising for your program is considered an allowable cost. It is allowed. It is something that you should be doing or have been doing all along. But as I said, there's more specifics to it than just, well, can you do it or not? Well, yeah, you can, but there's other things to it. So Jody, my answer to you is if you have a specific question, feel free to send me an email and I'll start researching and get you an answer.
Okay. She has another
ahead.
question, but it might not be in this part of the presentation. She's saying she has a question regarding splitting the costs across the funding streams.
The way I would do this, if I were you, is if you're advertising for your AEL program as a whole, you could use your 231 program funds. If you're looking to do specific trainings to integrated education and training with EL Civics, those you could definitely use your 243 funds, your IET EL Civics funds. But like I said, it sounds like we need to have a bit of a conversation offline, and because I'll probably need more detail for what it is you're asking. But good question, though. Good question.
Yeah. Okay. So she says thank you. And then Anna Soto says, yeah, these are good questions. So I guess if they've got specific questions for you, they need to email you, correct?
At this time, it would be preferable. Like we said earlier, a lot of these, there's not a end-all, say-all way of doing it. Now, TWC's cost allocations, there's the three criteria we have to meet, that we have to discern as grant managers. And that is it allowable per whatever rules are written in the grant? Is it reasonable? Is this a reasonable cost? And we're going to talk about that, I believe, a little bit later on. If it's not something that would be reasonable based off of how big the project is or how big the cost, like if we're talking signage, there's more questions that we have to allocate to that. And I believe I have a few scenarios towards the end. So I believe we'll go over that a little bit later. If not, hey, the way that Lori and I do things, if you have a question on, hey, can I spend money on this? You're more than welcome to reach out to us. And we're more than happy to go get you the answer that you need. And whenever I get an answer, y'all, for some of these advertising questions about the programs, I will send that out to all of you, and so that you can see what it is we're talking about, because you may have the same burning questions yourself. Okay, so this slide shows a bit of the connections of the data type to the funding in CEDAR for the types of services offered, how the services are categorized in consideration for funding, and how to account for expenditures in CEDAR. On the left are AEL combined or 231 funds with categories for admin, corrections, infrastructure, program costs, and training costs, and allowable services to be provided under those funds. On the right are IET EL Civics funds or 243 funding cost categories of admin, program, and training costs, and allowable services to be provided under this funding. Okay, so data accuracy and CEDAR. Why is this important? I believe that you all have gone through some of the training for why data integrity in teams is so important. Oddly enough, some of this information is used by other positions within your AEL grant to determine your expenditure spending. So, and it's entered on a biweekly basis as required in the AEL contracts. In the Texas Educating Adults Management System, or TEAMS, and in CEDAR, a monthly data validation is required for all entries. So why is it so important for both sets of data to be accurate? Well, it's because there's a connection. Like I said, there's a connection between your enrollments and your expenditures, and they go together a lot like a puzzle. There's a connection showing that if your enrollments for students are high, even just your basic general student enrollment, and your expenditures are not reflecting that, then it shows us two things. One, if you have a lot of students and your expenditures are specifically an AEL program are not closely aligned, as closely aligned to that as possible, then that tells us that either the budget that you have is very closely allocated to administrative functions, such as payroll, fringe benefits, things within your program, and that not a lot of the funds are being allocated towards the students, such as tuition for IETs, I believe, classes that could be paid for. If your enrollments are low, your expenditures that are specific to student services should also be low. There is a connection, and it took me, we'll say 2.5 years to be able to figure out that there was a connection, and I had to just tease it apart. I had to figure out how all of this works together so that I could bring my knowledge to the group. These are just general rules of thumb, though. I mean, if your enrollments are high, your expenditures should be high generally. If your enrollments are low, your expenditures should be low generally. Because one of the things we look at whenever we're looking at expenditures is we're looking at not just your enrollments, but we're looking to see, okay, is the money that's being spent per month going towards student services? If there's a calculation that we can do, and it's a comparison to show if you're running a very lean program, and what I mean by lean is you're doing things really, really cheap, or if you're using the money that TWC has allocated out to your programs to serve those students or serve students as best you can to get the money spent. Okay, so every month I have been sending out a monthly report card, which is what you see in front of you. And this is specifically for the AEL core programs, and it reviews your most recent validated data for both your enrollments and your expenditures. Now, granted, this is a sample report card for review. I'll go over how to look at it, how to read it. So box 1, that tells you if I put this in because one of the things I realized is as much as we communicate to directors and staff in the field that you need to be meeting performance, you need to spend your money. Well, I realized, okay, we're not exactly being clear. So let's be a little more clear. For this sample report card that you're looking at, this is based off of February data. So there's always going to be a date telling you when this data is from. Reporting in CEDAR is generally 30 days in arrears. So any report that's due on the 20th of the month, like, okay, for this month on the 20th, expenditures are due to be reported in CEDAR, and those are expenditures that were made for the month of May. So it's always about 30 days in arrears. I have a calculation where it tells you based off of the percent of time elapsed. This is based off of a 12-month cycle as opposed to a 24 or month cycle. I tell you how much you could be considered for exceeding performance, which is the box in green, and 90% of target is considered meeting performance. So if your expenditures range anywhere between the green box and the gold or marigold colored box, well, then you can assume that you're doing fine. The amount needed to be considered meeting performance in that box, there's a reason the note to the side helps explain it. If it's positive, you're considered at least meeting performance. So that means you're falling between the gold box and the green box somewhere. So you're fine. If the amount's negative, you need to try to make up that deficit somehow in order to be considered meeting performance. The second box that's bordered in red, this is basically to show what Cedar looks like. This Cedar is very basic, and what I try to do is put all of your information in one location so you don't have to go hunting everywhere for it, and so you don't have to try to discern it. I give you your budget, your expenditures to date, what your balance in those categories are, and it gives you, where you should be aiming, where you should be heading with all of this. Expenditures for the month in box 3, that just tells you how much you've spent already, how much and I use that information regularly. Lately, we've been doing assessments of programs due to COVID that that have been having some struggles with meeting performance or getting their money spent. Well, if I can sit and look at a budget of $700,000 and I can see expenditures for a month, we're at $109,000. Well, if they do that for too many months, you're gonna overspend. You're gonna have too many expenditures, and you'll be short when it comes down to your budget. This can lead to all kinds of bad things that we don't like talking about, like dangers of laying off staff, etc.
Ashley's saying she loves this version of monthly reports. And then Anna's asking, do you do this for each grantee? Like, do sub-grantees have access to this?
Unfortunately, subrecipients do not. And this is specific. This report card, as we call it, is specific to the TWC grantees because their reporting in Cedar is what I can see. So unfortunately, as a subrecipient, I wouldn't be able to assist, and I apologize.
Okay, she says that makes sense.
Fantastic. Okay, so box 4 shows you your monthly enrollments. This is to help you gauge where you're at for meeting your enrollment targets throughout the year. As you can see, I have a tally box that gets you the cumulative number that you need to be hitting, as well as, or the cumulative number that you have, I should say, as well as the record of, okay, well, these are how many enrollments you've had thus far. As we all know in education, summer and fall, generally in terms of registration and participants, is very rich. It has a lot of participants, a lot of students coming in, and then somehow along the way, winter or spring registration, not so strong. It is what it is. It's just the nature of the beast that we know of at this time. And as summer rolls around, enrollments are a lot less. I chalk this up to basically the wheel of time, because it is what it is. I've tried to rationalize it. I've tried to logically explain it to myself or others that are not familiar with education. And yeah, I can't do it because there's too many individual factors. Everybody has their own situations of, life outside of work or school. We do send out several programmatic reports from your program specialists, from the state director. And the AEL report card is the only report that shows you a relationship between how much money you're spending compared to how many students you're serving. So that's really to kind of help you figure out, okay, am I balanced? Am I not balanced? How are we doing here? Okay, these are some useful links for AEL for you all out there. There's the financial manual for grants and contracts. There's the WIOA or WIOA government information, AEL letter 0416 change 1, UGMS, CEDAR access. So what we've covered is your budget funding streams in AEL, your administrative costs versus program costs, your cost categories and what would go where, why data accuracy is important, especially when it comes down to your expenditures, and where to find information when you need it.
Okay, so Ashley has a question. Ashley Trevino, is there any guidance regarding how much of a director's salary needs to be admin versus program?
No. I can tell you that. No, there isn't any.
Okay, Jesus, thank you.
I've seen salaries for directors allocated strictly out of program. I've seen it allocated out of admin. One of the things I will say about expenditures and how to look at them is it's from a very accounting organized perspective. I'm actually going to be doing a session at the Fall Institute on some basics to help directors, help staff, help anybody have a better understanding of how we classify costs, basically giving an accounting 101 and maybe a cheat sheet. I haven't quite set all that up yet, but it is in the works. And I encourage you to come to the session because some of you don't know, some of you do. My background is in business. I'm not from the education world, but I do have a passion for helping students fulfill their dreams, their goals within education. But I am very knowledgeable of how I can take some of the ambiguity and make it more clear. I've noticed over the past few years while being the grant manager that something I know directors could benefit from is having a bit of basic accounting knowledge because it'll help you classify your expenditures a little bit easier. It's another resource to help. I'm all about helping, as folks know. So, and I really think it'll help remove some of the ambiguity and concerns. Okay, so.
Sounds like a good session. And Maria says, thank you for the great presentation. You have a great way of making us comfortable with numbers and that you can be reached at any time. While we may not have now, we know you are always within reach.
Yeah, I'm always within reach. One of the things I've told a few grantees is if you are not sure about anything, if you send me a message saying, hey, I need to talk to you about this because I don't understand it, or I need to pick your brain on this, I am always available. I will find a way to make time in my schedule to sit down and talk with you. I will make time to discuss what it is that we need to discuss. I will do whatever I can to make something as simple as possible, because there is no ands, ifs, or buts about it. What we do is extremely complicated. I got to spend a good portion of my time this weekend. I will share this. I got to spend some time with my grandmother-in-law, and she's from New Jersey, and she's never really known, actually my husband's family has no idea what I do, but they got to learn about what I do and the amount of passion that I have for taking something complicated, breaking it down into something simple. For somebody who's not familiar with our world and our terminologies to understand is really a great skill. I never really knew about it until I started doing presentations on the regular. But to be able to take a concept that is very intangible, can be confusing, is daunting to try to even understand, and make it as basic to understand and easy to understand as I can is something that I like to do. And I'm like, how many times in college, well, maybe it was just me because business, How many times in college did you have a professor or an instructor try to explain something and you just kind of sat there and you're like, I don't get that. I don't understand that at all. That doesn't make sense. Or it was very ambiguous and it was very vague and you just couldn't make sense of it. And you kind of, if you ask the instructor to, clarify a little bit, sometimes they just made it worse because the clarification was to their understanding, but not yours.
That's so true, Kara.
Oh, I know.
Sure. So we have a question from Tara. What's an estimate of cost per student in program year 21-22 and regular AEL and IET student, please? So I guess.
That is a wonderful question, and I do not have that answer. That is going to come from the target negotiation tool, which you'll be getting in hopefully a couple of months. I don't know what the number value is supposed to be at this time. I know last year, due to COVID and everything, that we didn't get the estimates or negotiation tool until extremely late in the year. In the past, prior to COVID, we were getting the negotiation tool for targets that would also have your cost per listed in, I want to say August or September. I may be wrong about that, but I know that the cost per student definitely comes from your target negotiation tool. That I can tell you. So any other questions first before I jump over?
No, just some comments that, like LaVonna's saying, you're very reassuring. And Ellen has said, yes, when you're talking about college professors and biochemistry all the time.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so this is what CEDAR looks like. This is what I see whenever I go to look at your reporting. This is what you will see whenever you go in. Now, especially if you have read-only access, you'll be able to see this. So we've got your AFLA combined administration line. For this particular grantee, this is an actual grantee, this isn't made up, this is real stuff. They have their admin subtotaled out. Generally, you will not see that, but it is something that we can do. I think it's a preference, just a matter of a checkbox, really. But you can see that there's a line for corrections institutions, infrastructure costs. I'm surprised I didn't get a question about infrastructure. Infrastructure is when you're renting a space at, let's say, your one-stop center, your one-stop job center, like your Workforce Solutions office, and you're paying them a monthly rent for that space. That's what infrastructure is. Professional development, that's for your staffing. That's even for your staffing to improve. That's the word I was looking for. Yes, improving on staffing is always good. We're in education. We want everybody to do better. We want people to expand their skills, learn more. Your combined program costs, if you're comparing the pots of money in the third column that says line budget amount, you're going to see that your AEL combined program costs has a lot of money. In this particular case, this person or this entity has over $1 million allocated to program costs. Well, the way I explain program costs is I consider this a catch-all, okay? So when you're not able to spend your money, or whenever you've fully expended your money, in professional development, let's say that you have spent all your money in professional development and you've got staff that are still doing training, they're still having to pay for training, and you still need to pay for that. Well, you can do that out of your AEL combined program costs. Let's say you need to get some technology. You need to get some Chromebooks and some hotspots for a technology loan program. Caveat, yes, you can do this. This is an allowable cost. We encourage it. Now, with that said, you can apply that to your budget in AEL combined program costs. Now, one thing I will say is What you're seeing in Cedar is how TWC has things aligned. I still encourage you to speak with your local fiscal person, accountant, whomever it is that handles your accounting for you, unless you do it yourself. If you do it yourself, then you know that there's something called a general ledger that you all have to go towards and inspect to make sure that you have enough money to spend in other areas. So basically it's just to keep you on track. But whenever folks are like, well, shoot, I've run out of money in corrections. I've run out of money in corrections. What do? I've still got students that are testing. I've still got students that we're teaching. I've still got staff that I got to pay. Well, you can always apply those costs to your program costs. And same thing with your IETs and EL Civics. Your program costs are going to be bigger than what you have allocated to your admin and your training. Now, one thing I didn't discuss a whole lot about earlier in the presentation is your performance-based funding. That's what PBF stands for. Every year in the allocations, we have about a 3% holdback on your budgets. That 3% is broken down into 1/3 and 2/3. Well, those are your performance measures A and your performance measure B. Measure A is your 1/3, measure B is your 2/3. Unfortunately, I do not remember what those measures are. I believe this past year it was total enrollments versus measurable skills gains. I could be wrong, but that's more of a programmatic thing that I'm still getting familiar with. We split off the performance-based funding from your budget so that you can look at it, you can plan for it, but you can't really touch it until we release it to you. And it's incentive. There's really no other word for it. It's incentive. The performance-based funding, because it's already determined to be part of your budget, we're not adding money to your budget. What we do is we take, let's say you meet your first performance measure. Well, I take that 1/3 portion of however much was set aside, and I move that from your program costs and performance-based funding into your AEL combined program costs. I do that so we're really not adding money per se, because there's no additional allocation. It's just being moved from one line to another. It's just a budget adjustment, for lack of a better description, just a complete budget adjustment. Now, if let's say you didn't meet your performance-based funding or your measure B as the year progressed, and okay, so what happens with that? Well, CWC will generally go in and we will remove that money. Now, because it's sitting in the performance-based funding line, you can't touch it, but we can. And what we can do is when performance is not met, we do a contract amendment, which goes through the signature process for both the TWC and local signature authorities. And what it does is it decreases the budget. So I had a question last week come in about, well, I thought I needed to do it, but do a signature on something. And I said, I think you're thinking of a grant amendment. And it's the way I'll explain it is if we're actually increasing your budget, not just a change from one line to another, but if we're giving you more money altogether, or if we're taking money away, then you're going to see a grant amendment. But we always tell you about all of this beforehand. We always notify you beforehand before we do anything, just to keep you in the loop. Okay, I will leave you all with this. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to me via email. I'm always available. Like I've said, I'm very supportive of new staff, new directors, new everything, because this stuff is very complicated and it's very overwhelming as a whole, not just what I've taught you, but as a whole, I know it's overwhelming. So if you have questions, you're not sure about something, you're always welcome to reach out to me and I will definitely make time to visit with you and help you with whatever it is you need. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to everybody else, or Elena.
Getting a lot of thank yous and great information. So
Fabulous.
Thank you, Kara, so much. Thank you for joining me today. And Kara, of course, we're going to go into the next part of our training, which will be covering monitoring. Okay, monitoring and compliance. So we will be covering for today the monitoring requirement for the grant, also monitoring tools that are provided by our agency. We will be speaking about going beyond monitoring for program quality, and also talking about quality assurance and program accountability. So first of all, for those of you who aren't familiar with monitoring, or you don't have any practices in place for monitoring your program and services, the information that we provide through our agency will be found in the AEL guide from pages 68 to 78. So you should have received this PowerPoint in your email last night. If you click on the link, which is highlighted in red, AEL guide pages 68 through 78, you're going to see everything that's related to monitoring listed here. So it's going to give you an overview of the section. It's going to talk about program accountability process, program oversight, monitoring, technical assistance, corrective action plan. So in the program oversight, it does give information on teams and data validation and invalidation, and how often you should be entering data. Just know that this is going to be slightly different from what's put in the assessment guide. The assessment guide doesn't speak directly about how often you should get data in. It only says that it needs to get in by validation time. But for program, for the program and monitoring purposes, it's very important to have your information in a timely manner, so that you have something to monitor. But monitoring is very specific when it comes to TWC. So we want to try to get beyond just those practices. But first, I want to give you the fundamentals, and then we'll talk about going beyond monitoring for evaluating program quality and things like that. So again, if you're not familiar, please do so. Go to the AEL guide, or even if you are doing monitoring now, it's always good to go back and make sure that, yes, we are following what the guidance is, suggesting to do. So what to expect when monitored? So there's a couple different things when it comes to monitoring. There's the monitoring that TWC does for the programs for the grant recipients. And then there's a requirement that all grantees have a monitoring policy, procedure in place for themselves. So not only should TWC be coming in and checking on, whether things are in compliance, or following rules and regulations, policy, all of those things, but the grant recipient themselves should have their own policy in place when it comes to monitoring for their subrecipients or anyone that's providing services. So what to expect when you're going to get monitored from TWC. And just to let you know, some people think that our department, AEL, Adult Education and Literacy, does monitoring. We do not. We do not come into your program to find things and then, there's going to be a repercussion for that. We're there to try to keep you from that point. So a lot of times when we point things out, it's not because we are wanting to put you in a bad light or say that you're wrong. It's all neutral. It's, really black and white for us. It's like, we're going to point this out to you to save you some headache in the long run, because we know monitoring at some point may come in because you're out of compliance with something. And so it's really the opportunity to make those corrections while you have a chance before monitoring comes in, because monitoring doesn't see you every year. There's so many programs that they have to oversee, and they also have to do monitoring of the boards. They just, really don't have the time to check everything. and see you all the time. So as program specialists in our department, we sometimes bring things to your attention, and it's not, again, to put you in a bad light. It's that opportunity to make a correction so that you are prepared when monitoring does come in. So monitoring is done by our Subrecipient Monitoring Department, or SRM, which is under the Regulatory Integrity Division, RID. So subrecipient monitoring, when they come in, they'll do site reviews or site visits, desk reviews, and they'll look at your financial information. And then they give you an opportunity to correct things. Now, if anything is found to look like it might be fraudulent, or there may be some activity that may be illegal, that's when RID will come in. RID will come in and they'll do a more extensive investigation of what's going on in your services. So just know that when the subrecipient monitoring comes in, it's not anything you should be afraid of, but it's definitely you should be something prepared for. And so I'm going to share with you some of the tools that they will be using when they come on site and when they're doing the desk reviews. So again, when they come to see you or ask for a desk review, they're going to be looking for a number of different things. So these are the things I've listed, or are listed actually in that AEL guide, that they will be looking into. So I've broken it down: program monitoring activities, financial activities. So they're going to look at what are you doing in terms of services? Are you making sure people are eligible? Do you have self-monitoring tools in place for your organization? And then they're going to be looking at the financial side of things. They're going to look at budgets. They're going to look at how you're spending, how you're reporting spending. Are you turning in your receipts? All of those types of things. And usually monitoring for them will last about a week to 2 weeks while they're visiting with you. And you usually will get a notification on when they will be coming to see you within the year. And the only preparation, I believe they give you a list of things to kind of get a heads up with. But in terms of checking your data and files and things like that, they'll usually ask for the files within that week that they're coming to visit you. They don't give you a whole lot of time to prepare in that area, because again, if you're already doing the things that you need to do, you're in compliance, you've been monitoring yourself regularly as a program, then you should be prepared when they come. Okay, so now let's talk about the other side of the house. So we just talked about when TWC comes in and they want to look at your files, they're looking to see if you're in compliance with the grant. That's one side of it. The other side of it is there should be monitoring going on for yourselves by the grant recipient for the subrecipients. So throughout the year, you should be following some kind of process that you put in place to do a lot of the things that our agency will do when they come in to see you, but hopefully going above and beyond that. So this is also from the AEL guide. All grantees must assess service providers' compliance with the appropriate information administrative requirements for grants and agreements that are applicable to the type of entity receiving funds as promulgated in OMB circulars or rules. So the main things that you should be doing in your monitoring are bulleted. Determine that expenditures have been charged to the cost categories within the cost limitations specified in the applicable laws and regulations. Determine whether there is compliance with other provisions of applicable laws and regulations, and provide technical assistance as necessary and appropriate. So this is the interesting thing here. Provide technical assistance as necessary and appropriate. So as you're going through your programs and your services, and maybe you're finding things that need improvement, maybe it's the process to enter data, things keep showing up as being input incorrectly or something like that. There should be assistance provided to correct those issues. It shouldn't be like, oh, we found an issue, fix it. It should be like, let's figure out why we have the issue, because there could be many reasons why you have an issue. And if it's not addressed, the issue could potentially keep arising. So that's really important to provide support to your team when you do find issues. So these are just really basic things. There's more detail provided in the assessment guide, the AEL guide. I highly recommend, again, if you're not familiar with the monitoring, go in there. And even if you don't think it's your job, because I find that a lot. Some people, there's a lot when it comes to the grant, but many times, one, either they think it's not their responsibility or job, or two, they never really tied it to what they're doing. It doesn't really make sense to them. But in all actuality, it's everybody's job to make sure that you're in compliance. Not that you know the grant totally. Give an example, a career navigator or data entry person. But because policies were created by your organization, everybody should be familiar with why those policies were created and be executing those things. I find many times people kind of are like, well, I never knew, or I didn't know we had an SOP for that, or, I didn't even know what an ITIC plan is. And in the end, that can be very costly for your program. So it's very, very important that everybody understands that it is everybody's job that you're in compliance, that you're following rules and regulations, and they're not just doing whatever they feel like doing. Okay, so a couple of things that you should have in place is you should have a risk assessment tool, a monitoring plan, a monitoring program, which establishes the policies and procedures that you're going to be using for monitoring, and then a reporting and resolution process. So again, the reporting and resolution is more, we've documented what the issue is, and then we've figured out how we're going to correct that thing so that it doesn't keep occurring. The monitoring plan is more of, okay, this is our timeline, this is when we're going to be visiting people. It's very transparent. People aren't taken off guard. You're very specific about what you'll be looking for. They understand why you're going in there. It's not like you're trying to just go in and surprise people and catch them off guard to see that they're doing something, or whatever it is. You want to be transparent of why you're doing it. Risk assessment tool is more of looking at what are the things that are potential risks for our program that we need to kind of set as priorities. So sometimes there's a lot of things that would really call your attention, but really understanding what if one thing may have more of a potential risk than another and may have more, dire consequences than another, and making sure that you have those things prioritized. You must also have a written policies and procedures in place to support what you're doing for monitoring. Most of you, again, directors, administrators, you're familiar with these policies, but how well are your staff familiar with these policies? How well are your instructors familiar with these policies? It's very important that communication is open and transparent. Again, they don't have to be experts on it, but they should at least have some knowledge of what's going on with these things. So let's talk about the monitoring tools that TWC provides. There's two main tools. One is for eligibility testing and one is for assessment testing. You should have received this in the email. Every year, our department gets together with the subrecipient monitoring department to look at, okay, are these the things that we will be checking for? And all of these things will have some kind of policy attached to them. So it's not stuff we just make up. It's stuff that within the guidelines, you should be in compliance with. So we'll go over the eligibility testing in a second, and then the assessment testing. You also should have received a guide in how to find this information. If you've never done this type of monitoring before, it can be very tedious and it takes a long time. And you think, oh, it'll be fast and easy. It's not. It's very time consuming, but I'm going to walk you through it here in a second, just to kind of give you a heads up. All right, so eligibility testing, what we're really looking for is, are the people that are coming into service, are they meeting the criteria to make them eligible for services? So in the form, what monitoring will do is they'll pick a couple of files and they'll list their information here. What they're looking for is, do you have the documentation for eligibility in column A? So here, age verified 16, 17, 18-year-olds as applicable. So they're looking for, do they have that documentation, whether it's a court order, the parent's signature, release form, all of those things for this specific group to, one, be in their file, and two, match what is in teams. So when we talk about verification in terms of age, if you're saying they're 16-year-old in teams, it's showing they're 16 years old, then in their file, you should have that court order. The next thing they look at is their proof of identity in the case file. So they're looking, did you record something for them showing what their identity is? Now, if you're not sure what your options are, there is an AEL letter that you can reference, and it'll give you different types of things that you can be asking for proof of identity. But again, it needs to be in their file. Release of information signed and dated as applicable. This is very important because if a person does not say yes to releasing information, then they cannot receive services. And the reason for that is this, because as you're collecting information, that information is shared with the state, and it's also, sometimes shared at a federal level. Now, if we cannot share that information, then we cannot provide services to this individual. So, I don't know if you all have ever maybe come into a difficulty when you're gathering information from someone and they may have not wanted to sign that and saying, I'm comfortable with sharing information. But the situation is, if they don't say yes, you cannot accept them into services. It's very, very clear on that. Next, completed, signed, and dated enrollment form. So everybody should have an enrollment form. You should be completing all the Pearl information, and that should also be in their file. So what will happen with the enrollment form, I think this is the one where monitoring is a lot of detail to, because they'll literally go through your enrollment form and they'll see if the information matches in teams. They'll see, does the date of birth match? Does, the name match? Everything has to be exact as what is entered into teams. Any question on the eligibility testing?
Yes, Anna's asking, can you reference the identity letter that you mentioned?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but the AL letters, again, these are things you should be familiar with. I know that it's sometimes difficult because there's a lot of information, but taking them and organizing them in a way where you know what you're looking for and what information, what AEL letter you should be looking for. So we don't have anything like that at the state level right now to say, okay, this goes with eligibility, look at this letter. This goes with, if you're looking at testing, anything related to testing, look at this letter. And it's definitely something we should develop. I know that Liz Moya has developed something and she has shared it before. This is something maybe you should be doing for yourselves also, is getting from the AEL letters and knowing what areas they apply to. That's really, really important.
Okay, so Maria and Ann put in, it's AEL letter 0518, approved forms of identity, and they did put the link.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ann and Maria. And then the TANF one is on 0115 change one. So there we go.
Okay, perfect. I appreciate that so much. That's why it's great having people on your team that
Yes.
also know where things at and they can get it like really quickly. Okay, so assessment testing. Now we just talked about eligibility. That's for people coming into a program. Assessment testing has to really do with testing and assessment. So here again, they're going to be looking at the file and looking at teams at the same time. They're going to look at, for column A, do the scores in the file match the scores entered into teams? Every test that you give an individual, your approved NRS test, need to be recorded, whether or not they do well on the test or not. And it's not about doing well on a test. It's just really seeing where they're at. But all test scores should be entered into teams, and you should have documentation, the testing instruments that you use in the file. Very important too, and I don't think everybody considers this, but the date that they tested should match what's entered into Teams. We've had situations where the dates don't always match. Sometimes the scores are off. Maybe someone was entering data really fast, but monitoring is going to look for all those things. B, does the case file contain documentation to support each measurable skills gain noted for the client in Teams? So we talked about or have mentioned measurable skills gains many times. There are different options for measurable skills gains. In the past, the only option you had was making a gain on the domain of significance. Now you have multiple options. You can make a gain in any area of testing. You can get your enrollment into post-secondary after exiting. You can get your high school equivalency, or a student CAT, not you because you're not in services. And then you also have everything related to the MSG options for people that are in training. So if you are claiming anything in Teams, we need to see the documentation. You can't just go in Teams checking off boxes and saying, yeah, they did this or that, but you don't have any proof of that. So really, really important that that's included in the file. In column C, does the case file contain documentation to support each credential noted for the client in Teams? So much like MSGs, you have to have documentation if you are wanting to take credit for this. You can't just, again, be checking stuff off in Team with no actual documentation. All daily attempts, including workforce training hours, are entered in Teams and are supported with documentation. So again, what you're entering in Teams has to have proof, some kind of record of where you're getting this information from. So you'll generally have your sign-in sheets. Maybe you'll have the printout if you're doing distance learning from the whatever software they're using. If you're doing training hours or training services, that's a little bit different also in terms of how you get that information. Because a lot of times the training is done by a third party, and they aren't familiar with AEL and our sign-in sheets. Some of them are very cooperative and they're willing to do the sign-in sheet thing, but sometimes we have situations where AEL students are participating in a general class with other college students, and maybe the instructor just doesn't want to do the general sign-in sheet. But there are different ways of collecting that information. As long as you have the documentation, you have something showing where you're getting those hours from. The last column, does the case file contain initial development of the individual training, education, career plans for customers? So this we talk about a lot, and some people are familiar with the ITEC plan, some people are not. The ITEC plan is the start of what you're doing with your students when it comes to goal setting. So this should be happening during orientation, during their onboarding process, where you're getting into a conversation about, what are your goals, not just for your education, but career, life. Some programs do extensive, even just anything besides just the education goals. But it doesn't stop there. So what I'm hearing a lot of times is it gets started, there's a conversation about it, and it may or may not follow the student into the classroom. So sometimes it is reviewed, but then it's not revisited again. But at a minimum, it has to be initiated, and this is what it's asking for. So monitoring will come in, they'll look in the files, and they'll see what your ITEC plans are. They'll see that you've been providing this service to the student, and what have you been doing with the plan. Any questions so far? Any query on this information?
Yes, there's a question. Anna said, so this is hypothetical. The student tells us, I got my citizenship. They should provide a certificate number, or should they provide a certificate number?
They got their citizenship.
Citizenship,
So that would not be a requirement for an MSG. Them get their citizenship.
Okay.
That's when they would need it. Yeah, documentation only, it's good to have that, but in terms of MSGs and credentials are what we're looking for, and getting a citizenship doesn't fall into any of those categories.
Okay. So she's asking, what do I put in Teams? And you kind of just answered that question, perhaps, that it's not going to work for that purpose.
Yeah, so knowing what MSG options are and what you're looking for in terms of credentials, those are required things. Now, what you're talking about is kind of like, yay, that was great, you did that, but
I
it's
see.
nothing that you need to be in compliance for in this case.
It's icing on the cake.
Yes, pretty
Okay,
much.
she says thanks.
You're welcome.
That's
Any
all.
other?
No, I'm not seeing any other questions yet.
Okay. So let's talk about going beyond monitoring for quality, program quality. Now, I have to emphasize this time and time again. We just saw what's required for the most part with the tools, and it's not the only stuff, okay? You still got the financial side of the house. Monitoring will also look at your SOPs. They'll look at the files. They'll look at a lot of different things. They're not looking for quality of service. And we have to remember that, because if that's all you're building into your program in terms of how you're evaluating services and monitoring your services, or, you know, really what's happening is you're monitoring for compliance. You're not monitoring to get a better program. So what I mentioned is monitoring alone with the monitoring tools will not give you a quality program. These tools are mainly for compliance, but cannot give you a good measure of the quality of services, completions, customer service, instructional integrity, and other areas of grant compliance. So this is where you're going to want to utilize your performance accountability and quality assurance staff. Now, I have to emphasize that these individuals should not be the director. And I know for the smaller program that sometimes happens is it falls on the shoulder of the director, because maybe you're feeling we don't have someone who can do those things. But you have to look at it this way. In terms of integrity, it's like someone who baked the cake and then the person that is giving you feedback on the cake. Of course, if you baked it, you're going to say, yeah, it's the best cake ever. Of course, I put all my blood, sweat, and tears into it. It's going to be the best cake. But then you have someone who maybe didn't bake the cake and tries it and can give you honest feedback, like, no, we need to improve because maybe you left out the eggs or maybe, it really doesn't taste as wonderful as you think it does. So it's really important to get honest, candid feedback, and it needs to, be from someone who isn't, again, the main person in charge of the program. Very, very important. So these two positions are required positions. We're getting more into the conversation of how do these positions operate? What things should they be doing? And they're two different things. We went over this in one of our, I think it was a summer meeting or something, and we gave some information on, how are these two things defined, or two roles defined? What should they be doing? How do they benefit the program? And again, yes, they could be doing monitoring with the tools that we provide, but what else are you doing? What else have you built in to really be evaluating how well is our program doing? How can we make it better? How can we ensure that people are coming to us and they're receiving what we're advertising at a minimum, and two, what their expectation is? So for performance accountability, this individual, it says 20%. So what does that mean? That means if you have a person that's full-time, 20% of their time would go to performance accountability. There's information on this position in attachment A. So for the grant recipient that received the funding, they would have access to attachment A. If you're a subrecipient or someone else on the staff, you would have to speak with the individual that received this information to get it. So they're in charge of managing compliance to all of the information that we provide. We provide a lot of information. So this is the person that would really be familiar with the AEL letters, with the assessment guide, with the AEL guide, all of those things. And it's a lot of information. And that's why you may have one person that's just focused on this. We do have programs that have one person that just does quality assurance. That's their only job, because it can be a lot. Support coordination of data collection and performance reporting for discretionary innovation products funded by the agency to expand new service options as applicable. serve as a point of contact for staff or program and/or consortia if applicable, questions related to accountability, assessment, data management. So this is a person, before going to our agency, before going to your program specialist, should know these things because it's part of their job. Because they know these things, they're able to build out criteria that would help you to develop processes and procedures to help you really get into, are we doing things well? So give an example, they would help to create the surveys that you put into the classrooms. Maybe they have a process and how they're doing staff evaluations or how they're doing classroom evaluations. They would be on the team for all of these things because they understand what the grant is requiring.
Jennifer Myers is asking, who does take on these duties typically?
Every program's different. We don't have a good handle on it right now. We are going to be putting out more support for these positions. So I start identifying who these people are, but really these people should be in this position based on what is being asked of them. So if you have someone that should be familiar with rules and regulations, someone that is, good with creating processes and procedures, you're not going to have your average person in there. You're going to have someone that maybe has had experience with this type of thing or handling a grant or coming up with measures to assess quality. You're not going to just have any average person in there. And that's really why it's important for the programs to look at, first and foremost, who do we have in there now? Do they have the skills and experience to make these things successful for us to best utilize this position? And that has to be an honest conversation with the program. Sometimes I feel like people are being put in this position because it's this idea of like, well, they were available. So we gave them the title just to be in compliance with the grant. So I don't know if that answers your question. Again, every program's different, but you have to look at what are you trying to accomplish with these positions, and does that individual meet the minimum requirements in terms of skills and experience?
Okay, she says yes, thank you.
Okay. So quality assurance, 10% of a person's time. These are the people that are really going to go around. They're working with the other position in creating things. As a matter of fact, your whole organization should be working together and you should be getting input when creating processes and procedures, especially for specific areas. So if you want to do something in terms of quality assurance for instruction or performance accountability, you're going to want input from people that are working in that area and what we should be looking for. Same way with data entry. How are you measuring those things, checking on those things to ensure that what we're doing and what we're using is going to be most effective in getting us the best results? You're going to have a better chance of creating something that works for you if you get buy-in and information from your team, that the people that are actually doing the work in the field. But sometimes what we do is we create these things and we don't ask for advice. We kind of just build them out and it's not in alignment with what's happening out in the field. So quality assurance, it's going to be, this is the thing, like, well, what is doing what? That was kind of like the conversation of who is doing what. Quality assurance, when you think about it, think about whenever you receive a product. The product, before it gets sent out into distribution, is going to go through a process to ensure that product is exactly what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to work the way it's supposed to work. It's going to go through a quality assurance process. So it's kind of the same way with your services. What are our checks and balances that are being done? What do we have in place? What do we have to refer back to that is going to ensure that what we're putting out into the community, what we're providing to our customer, because students, that's really what students are, they're our customers. How are we ensuring that that is the best thing that we can possibly be providing? And this is where the quality assurance would come into play. So they would also be part of creating things, but they're also more of the kind of checks and balances, especially when it comes to data. Any questions on that?
Yes, Lavana's asking, is quality assurance also related to instructional integrity, or is that a separate position? can they be the same person?
It can be. So the quality assurance would be more the processes that you have in place, like more of something, things that you can measure, things that are measurable. So given an example with quality assurance, maybe you create a process where you're utilizing data to measure an instructor's performance. So when I say measure instructor's performance, we know that the requirement of a grant is to get an MSG, to get completions, to have required hours. So if I'm the quality assurance person, I'm going to want to see that my instructor is meeting those things that are built in. You know, let's say, for example, every student, every participant needs to get an MSG. So I'm looking at that instructor and how many of their students are actually getting MSGs. Are they post-testing and making progress? Are they getting that HSC completion if that's what they're coming into services to? So that would be an example of the quality assurance aspect of it.
Okay, I don't see any other questions right now.
And I know that some programs are probably doing well with some of these things. Quality assurance isn't necessarily that something that was looked at in terms of services really up until this point. But this program year, we've really focused on looking at quality, not just enrollment. And we can't do that with the monitoring tool. So we have to start going a little bit deeper and thinking about what things can we be using, what tools can we develop so that we can ensure better results for the students. Okay. So I would definitely recommend going to the AEL guide, looking at those pages, looking at the information that is presented and provided, because not all of that was covered here. I just wanted to kind of give you the basics and put you in the right direction. And for those of you who weren't familiar with this information, and now it gives you an opportunity to get more engaged with this conversation. Okay, so let me bring up the other PowerPoint really quick. So we're going to go into the POP report next. So this was originally presented by Veronica Moore, this data and information. I've modified it slightly for this presentation. Some of you may have caught it. It was on I think it was on a Manager Monday a few months ago, but it's always good to get the refresher. So the objective for the materials today is what is periods of participation. We're going to talk about AEL Order 0119 policy and guidance concerning POPs. What is the POP report and where it is located in teams? The POP report summary, report extract, and POP report description. And how can the POP report help with program performance measures? So when does a period of participation start? POP quiz. When a student completes an application form and is made eligible for services by testing, when a student starts attending classes, when a student has accumulated 13 proxy hours, or when a student has accumulated 12 direct hours and the hours are entered into teams. If you could just put into chat what you think the answer is. So again, some of you may have seen this presentation already, but for those of you who are totally new, what do you think the answer is? When does
You're getting a lot of D's and started classes. D's, I'm seeing D's.
D's? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You said someone said started classes?
Mm-hmm. Started classes.
Okay. So most of you already know that it is when a person receives 12 direct hours, not training hours, not proxy hours, 12 direct hours, and they're entered into teams. So there's two parts to it. They have to, one, accumulate the hours, but it actually has to be recorded. If it's not recorded, they're not showing up as a participant. Now, this may be a little bit more information than is required for the slide, but I'm going to share it anyways. For those of you, as a reminder, if you have been exercising the option of using a non-approved NRS test, what does that mean? So we have approved NRS tests that we use to determine eligibility, but when COVID hit, we weren't able to get face-to-face testing, which was what was normally done, and we had to build out the remote testing, which took some time. So as some flexibility in that time period, we allowed testing with non-approved NRS tests. So what does that mean? With the non-approved NRS tests, you were able to get them into teams. And before you wouldn't, because teams would only allow approved NRS tests. This is the situation you run into. If you continue to use non-approved NRS tests and a person is never tested with an NRS test, you are not getting credit for that person. So even though in teams it looks like you're recording hours and all that stuff, that's true, but they are not going to be counted towards your performance. You are not getting credit for them. So it's very, very important that if you use the flexibility just to get them into services so they don't have to be on a waiting list, that's fine, but you need to get them tested with an approved NRS test. The other important thing to know is before you can get a measurable skills gain with them, they have to become a participant. If you're not getting the 12 hours, they never become a participant. You are not responsible or on the hook for getting an MSG. So what are some things that can be found on the POP report? For those of you who are familiar with the POP report, this will be easy for you. Some of you who have never used the POP report, this is going to be new information to you. A, when a student has exited. B, how many hours a student has accumulated. C, when a student became a participant. Or D, all of the above.
Okay, getting lots of Ds. All Ds so far.
Okay, great. Yes, all of the above. So the POP report has some very useful information. The MSG has its own information and they're very different right now. I know there's going to be a change on the POP report, I believe. I can't remember. I know we're always making changes all the time. But for the most part, what you find on the POP report, you are not going to find on the MSG report. That's why it's really important to know what's on each report and how it can be of use to your program. All right, so getting into periods of participation. More on the POP report. So getting 12 direct hours requires a baseline assessment. So you have to make them eligible before you can start accumulating hours. Really what it means is you have to make them eligible for services with a test, and then you can put them into a class where they start accumulating hours. If they are not made eligible with the testing, then you shouldn't be putting them to a classroom. Now you do have the flexibility of testing them in a staggered way, so they're not getting all the tests at one time. So for example, you decide to test them in math first, and it shows that they're eligible for services, you can then put them into a class and they can start accumulating hours, and then you can do the rest of the tests within, I believe it's 5 days or 12 class hours, something like that. Or you can do all the tests at one time. The point is you have to make them eligible for services before you can put them into a classroom. Hours that will keep a POP active, so a period of participation will remain a period of participation unless a person exits from services. So these are the hours that will keep a person active. If you're recording direct hours, proxy hours, or trading hours up to 60 days after the direct hours in an IET have ended, they will keep this POP status active. If they're not getting any kind of contact at all, then that person will exit and you will have to start over in building their period of participation, which would require to get 12 direct hours again. So looking at program year versus period of participation. This is something for people to remember to wrap their brains around because it affects the reports that are in team. Now with the program year always runs from July 1st to June 30th every year. For new people, very important to know. Period of participation can be infinite for the student unless they're exited. So they can have multiple periods of participation over multiple program years. They can have one continual period of participation over multiple program years. The important thing to remember is within the program year also, we're looking at meeting targets and we're looking at meeting measurable skills gains. So every program year, a participant should be getting at least one measurable skills gain. Periods of participation, if you're looking in terms of credential, is going to start being impacted after they exit. So again, after they've gone 90 days or more without service, teens will retroactively show what the exit date was, and then you would be looking towards what type of credential are they achieving. Employment, high school equivalency can also be counted as a credential, but it has to be after they exit and then they enter into post-secondary.
Okay, yes, Tara has a question. What's the minimum required number of orientation intake hours to determine eligibility? Is it still 3 hours reported as career and training services and teams? That might be 2 questions.
Yeah, that's still a requirement. So what happened is sometime before, a couple years ago, orientation used to count. You could count orientation towards direct hours. But why it changed? The direct hours, as it was explained to me, should really be counted towards them working towards testing, right? The direct hours are counted towards testing. Orientation really had nothing to do with instruction. It had more to do with giving information on the program, making them eligible for services. So orientation is still required. You're just not getting credit for direct hours. So you have to put it into the student services, and it should be a minimum of 3 to 12 hours. Most people are doing a minimum of 3 hours, which, again, you're in compliance. But when we talk about quality, are the students really getting what they need? And if you look at what's mentioned in comprehensive assessment in the AEL guide, orientation is part of comprehensive assessment, and comprehensive assessment generally happens before you put them into a classroom. So there's a number of different things that you should be doing. And if you read that information and you're doing all those things, you have to then step back and ask yourself, really, is 3 hours enough? Is 3 hours really what we should be doing for orientation? So I would say to get familiar with that, see what you really should be providing, and is 3 hours enough? So 3 to 12 hours. Does that answer your question? Yes, it's required. Every participant should at least get one orientation while they are a participant in your program. At least one orientation.
Okay, she says thanks.
So if you're looking for some information in terms of policy and guidance, AEL Letter 0119 will be the document that you'd want to be referencing. I believe it's pretty lengthy. It may take some time to get through that. This is where your program specialist would be in an advantage to you, where you say, I really don't know what this thing is saying. And that's okay. Or maybe you need clarification on, I'm interpreting it this way, but is this really what it's saying? That's where having a conversation with your program specialist would be very useful and beneficial. Because at some point, if you're the one that's receiving this information, you need to be sharing it with your staff, and you need to try to explain things to them. Or maybe you're trying to get something in place, but someone always asks, well, where's that in writing? I know everybody has had that experience. I have it all the time. Where does it say that we need to be doing that? That's when you have to be able to find that AEL letter and say, right here on this page, this is where it's referencing that. Because the last thing you want to do is just give the impression to your staff, because that's the way it is. You want to be able to justify why things are being done, or at least at a very minimum, try to give them explanation and insight, and why a decision was made, or what you're trying to do moving forward. So the period, let's talk about the POP report. So the POP report is going to really focus on anyone that becomes a participant. You can also see who has not yet become a participant, which is really great, because a lot of times programs might think they need to be out recruiting a lot of people, because they're like, we're not getting enough people into our services. But when you look at how many people haven't reached 12 hours, you might be very surprised at how many students you're actually losing. So before you go out and recruit more individuals, or use time and energy, I'm not saying to shut down that work, because it's very important that you keep those pipelines open. But it's equally important that you're looking at your services and looking at during orientation or within the first couple hours, how many people are leaving our services. So maybe that's an indication of, well, maybe we need to try to do things differently. And it's also, the POP report is set up in a linear design. So you can basically see what a person has been doing over time. You'll also get to see the different how many periods of participation a person has had. So why is that important? Well, if we have a person that's come in and out of services multiple times, you're going to want to really address what's going on with that individual and see if your program is the best fit for them. Because at some point, they need to be making progress. If they're just coming in and out and coming in and out, you're getting multiple periods of participation. And we see it all the time. Okay, so where can you find the POP report and how you access information? So you're going to go into Teams and you're going to log in. And then you'll be able to see reports, participants, and then periods of participation. You're going to want to put in the frame, the time frame that you're pulling the information for. This can be changed at any point when you're pulling the information. Maybe you just want it for 1 month. Maybe you want it for the whole program year. Then you would just switch out the dates. Then you will also choose your funding sources. Now, this is important if you're doing, or if you have grants like statewide initiative grants that are different from the AEL grant. Maybe you have grants that are coming out of the same agency, our same agency. Give an example, the ATX grant or the Accelerate Texas grant. You're only going to really want to pull information for the funding that comes under the AEL grant if you're wanting to get a true reflection of what participants are being served with the grant. Oops. The other option you have is pulling information by provider sites and classes. So this is good for, if you have a number of different sites and you really just want to focus on one specific site's performance. The other thing here, report options, participants, individuals with 12 direct hour contact hours only. So you do have the option of just pulling for participants. But again, it's really nice to see if you have people who aren't at 12 hours yet and whether or not they may be in the process of getting to the 12 hours or if they've altogether stopped services with you for, maybe they've gone a couple weeks, more than likely they're not returning. Then you have 3 options at the bottom. You have run report summary, run report extract, and view report description. Now with the report summary, you're going to see that it's generated in this way. It's not going to give you as much information as the extract. So it's very high level. So it's going to tell you who a participant is, have they exited already or getting ready to exit, when was the last time they had instructional hours, are they excluded from exit-based performance. So very high level information, and it's all pretty self-explanatory. If you just look at the columns, it'll give you an indication of what information you're getting. So the participant flag, when it says yes, it means they became a participant. If it says no, that means they are not quite yet at the 12 hours. So the Exeter flag, if they have a yes, that means they've gone 90 days or more without service. They haven't got any hours, direct training, proxy hours. And so they have been exited from the program. This will tell you when they have their first direct contact hour. That means they've come in and they started services with you. The participation start date is when they actually become a participant, and now you're on the hook for getting an MSG or completion, credential, all of those types of things. And such and sport. But you can again look at this, and then there's also from the view report description, it's going to tell you what each of the columns mean for this option here, which is the report extract. So the report extract will give you a lot of additional information. You'll also get to see if they have multiple periods of participation. So if you have an individual that has a participant ID, and then they have, so the same participant ID, but multiple participation IDs, that means they've come in and out of services multiple times. And then participant flag and so forth. Now, the view report description, if any of you are new to this and you're just now looking at the POP report, you've never looked at it before, I would say run the report extract and then view the report description. The report description will tell you what each column means. So that'll be very useful to you if you're just starting out and you've never used the POP report before. So how does this information support local analysis? And I'm not going to go through each one of these, but basically the column will tell you what it reads, what it tells you, and how to use it. So give an example with the participant flag, who is in the denominator for performance measures. So everybody that becomes a participant, again, you're on the hook for performance measures, whether it's with targets, whether it's MSGs or credentials, and how to use it. So you can track for program outcomes, for example, MSGs and exit base. So again, all this information is here, and it's broken down pretty easily for you to understand. So what does this report not tell you? It doesn't provide information on measurable skills gain or participant outcomes other than high school equivalency. So that's the main difference between the MSG report and the POP report. So for teams, what's coming up? All the new reports and teams will be built to help you better manage student performance in real time, help you better understand patterns that are occurring, and support future system enhancements that correlate to real performance expectations. So teams it couldn't do a whole lot when we first started. So there has been a lot of enhancements made, ways to collect better information, input, upload information, better track the students, but you have to be doing something with it. So we put all this stuff into teams, but at the end of the day, if you're not using it, you're not analyzing the data, you're not using it for program improvement, it's not really helping you. And it's not helping the state as a whole for us to have better results as AEL overall. So this presentation, again, was given during that series of Manager Monday. This followed Veronica's POP report, but it's been modified slightly for today, not too much. So to be covered today, what is an MSG options, what is the MSG report that is useful, what is in the MSG report that is useful, and where to find the MSG report. So what we're going to try to accomplish today is describe to others how to locate and download the MSG report, identify where to find information in the MSG report that will help with participant performance, compare how not knowing about the MSG report and now knowing how to use the MSG report can benefit you in helping your students obtain their goals, and design or propose a process which uses the MSG report to increase numbers of participants tested, as well as increase post-testing gains. So a couple of questions of the following. What are options for MSGs? A post-test, B, enrollment into post-secondary, C, passing a content area of the GD and or HiSET, or D, none of the above. What do you think the answer is? Or do you think it's multiple answers?
Getting a couple of D's. Okay, is everyone back? Usually last time we had lots of answers. Okay, more D's. About 3.
3 Ds, people not sure maybe?
Could be.
Those of you who saw this presentation know the answer.
Someone says A, B, and C.
A, B, and C, okay. Well, that's different from D, so that's good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the real answer is none of the above. And this was meant to be a trick question. Again, if you saw this presentation, you know the answer. But we have to remember that it's only an MSG is if you make a gain. So you can post-test but not make a gain. You have not made a measurable skills gain. Enrollment into post-secondary after exiting. So if you have people enrolling into post-secondary while they're still in participation in AEL services, that would not be considered an MSG. It has to happen after they exit from services. And then passing a content area of the GD and or HiSET, that was never an option. So none of the above. So going into measurable skills gain, there's a couple of different options for MSGs. You can look more into this information in AEL Letter 0118 Change 1, Educational Outcomes for Adult Education and Literacy Update. But you have two main areas. You have your education, you have your options to measure education activities, and then you also have the workforce training and IT options, which will be type 3, 4, and 5. The education options will be type 1A, 1B, and 2. And this breaks it down a little bit further for you. So those of you who are totally unfamiliar with MSGs, this is kind of giving you a watered down version of all of this explanation and information. And that's why we're doing the follow-up support services, so that we can go into a deeper dive on these things. And any questions that you may have, they may not pop up right now, maybe they'll pop up later, but you can be prepared to ask those questions and we can help you walk through things. So with basic education, we talked about program year, and that runs from July 1st to June 30th. So every person that becomes a participant, they get 12 hours, needs to make an MSG within the program year. So those would be your basic education options, type 1A, 1B, and 2. Now, anyone that's participating in training, whether it's an IET or an IET EL Civics, will have to get that type of MSG along with a basic education MSG within the program of study. So what does that mean? So if they're in training, they may not always complete their training within a program year. Sometimes training may go over multiple program years. It just depends on how the training is set up. So in that case, types 3, 4, and 5, you would get that MSG during that time they're actually participating in that training or IET. Now, here's another breakdown of what the MSGs look like. Some people are more visual and the wording doesn't help them, so I thought I would include this. So on the left-hand side in the circle, everybody that comes into a program needs to get at least one type of educational MSG. And here are your options. You can either post-test them and make a game. You can have them enroll into post-secondary after they exit, or you can get a high school equivalency completion. Again, all of this has to happen within the program year. The other options, 3, 4, and 5 that you see to the right is going to be for anybody in training, and this happens within the program of study. So again, program of study might go over multiple program years. As long as they're completing it within that time frame, then you've met that requirement. Another breakdown for you all, but this gives you a little bit more explanation on what information needs to be collected for the type of MSG. So again, we have it broken down into basic education MSGs, and then we have workforce training, IET training MSG options. And it talks a little bit about what you would be collecting. So we talked about in monitoring and compliance, anything that you're reporting in terms of an MSG credential completion, you need to have that in Teams, or you have to, have that in their file. So this is some of the information that you will be collecting. So here, the guidance, again, many times people will come to us and say, where does that say in writing? So I wanted to be very explicit, and where it says for anybody that's in an IET, they need to have to get both types of MSG, an education and a training. And this is the current guidance. It will be changing, but this is what we have in place right now. So this is a requirement at least until the end of this program year, until June 30th. And then July 1st, things may change, but up until the end of the year, it remains the same. So as you're closing out your information for the end of the program year, you're still working with this guidance that we have, which basically says if you're in training, if you're a student in training, you're getting that basic education option, post-testing, HSC completion, enrollment into post-secondary. After exiting, so if they're in an IET, it doesn't count as an MSG. I know for some individuals, they want to, or some programs, they want to count people that are in their IETs as enrollment into post-secondary. And that doesn't count here because they're still enrolled in AEL services. So I need to emphasize that if that's happening and you're recording them as being in an IET and marking them as enrolled into post-secondary, that is not correct. So this is where the guidance is. This is where it says you have to have both. Now I'm talking about, I mentioned a change coming up. The change actually already happened. And if you want to do a little bit more learning on this, you can go to the NRS website and you can go to the technical assistance guide, and it'll talk about how now the types 3, 4, and 5 will be counted in some situations as the only MSG you need. So you don't need to get both. But again, our guidance hasn't changed yet. So I'm just giving you a heads up, but our guidance will be in alignment to the change that has happened. So it's highlighted here exclusively for participants who are enrolled in an integrated education or workplace literacy program. A measurable skills gain can also be achieved by exhibiting progress on a post-secondary transcript showing progress towards milestones or passing a technical occupational knowledge-based exam. So we won't have to be going back and forth with 2. We will be looking at going with 1 for those people in the IET. But again, we have not changed our information that we have out in the field yet.
Okay, there's a question. Kara has a question. If an IET student obtains a workforce training MSG by passing a state exam, but doesn't achieve a type 1A, 1B, or type 2 MSG in basic education MSG, can we add skills progression as MSG under gains and teams? It's a long one.
So Ann Savino, would you like to field that question?
Yeah, sure. And if I'm understanding it correctly, yes, right now we want you to report your MSGs for workforce training. So that's a workforce training MSG. So that should be reported. We do want you also to make sure they're getting basic skills and enough rigor that they are making gains. So you should be post-testing them, and you should be giving them enough hours of basic skills instruction that rigor supports basic skills improvement. Does that answer? I think that answers your question.
Tara, does that answer your question?
Yeah, your workforce training MSGs should be reported.
Okay, she says the participant didn't show progress after post-testing.
Okay, and that's a basic skills or an educational functioning level gain, which is required. And so basically your data will show a failure to make a basic skills gain, but in a workforce skills gain was attained. One of the 2 requirements we currently require. So I would look at whether the rigor was, whether you had enough rigor or time in a basic skills class. So maybe you didn't have enough time in that class for them to make a gain on a post-test.
Okay.
Okay, I see you say they
Yes,
didn't show
yes.
it after post-testing.
Right.
Yeah. So, okay, so you're not going to report one, but you'll report the workforce training one.
Okay, thanks, Ann.
Sure.
Okay, so thank you, Ann, for fielding that question, answering that question. These are the outcome measures. So for those of you who are new to AEL, you may be wondering, well, what are all the things that we need to meet under the AEL funding? So a couple of things, while they're in services, while they're within the program year, everything that should be met is in blue. So you have total enrollment, and then you have targets besides total enrollment, which would include services for EL Civics, IET EL Civics, IET, and intensive. Intensive will include your reentry to corrections, your workplace literacy, and your ESL for professionals, or services for your internationally trained professionals. So you actually have 3 options under intensive services in meeting that target. And then you have measurable skills gains. Again, if a person becomes a participant, getting a measurable skills gain for them, and doing it within the program year between July 1st and June 30th. Now, the description will give you information on what all this is. Total enrollment, people will start counting towards that once they get the 12 hours. Any of the other areas, if they get 12 hours and they get 1 hour coded with any of those funding codes associated with those services, you will get credit towards that target. But again, we're getting away from doing the very minimum and monitoring and really, because of the way it's set up in teams, there's no real way to check for the quality of what's being provided. So if you're only doing 1 hour or a few hours in an IET after they become a participant, it's really not a good measure of quality of service. So that's where it's really important for people that are doing quality assurance and program accountability that you're going into the data and you're really looking at how many hours are people accumulating in the service that we're providing to them, and are they, what kind of progress are they making, whether it's with post-testing or completions or credentials. Now, everything in green is what happens after exiting. So credential obtainment and employment. Again, for those of you who are and it's not a credential, but for the MSG part of it, if you have people enrolled in an IET, you wouldn't be counting that as a post-secondary enrollment, because that happens after they exit from services. Does anybody have any question on any of these outcome measures?
Not seeing any questions.
Okay, but you can see here very clearly where measurable skills gains kind of falls within everything that's expected with the grant. So fun facts on MSGs: each participant has to get a measurable skills gain every program year and achieve outcome measures after each period of participation. Measurable skills gains show progress towards an outcome. More opportunities for measurable skills gains were made available to AEL programs at the TWC AEL Summer Business Meeting 2017. So this started, gosh, what is this now? 4 years ago, where our agency was talking about the different options that you have for games. Now, what's unfortunate is even though there's so many more options for games, aside from just post-testing on the domain of significance and making a game, measurable skills games, we're still not doing well in that area. Now, with post-testing, what we find is when you post-test students, generally they do well and they'll make progress, but all the other options aren't very strong. So when we look at HSC completions, we look at enrollment into post-secondary, not a lot is being reported in those areas. So we just have to assume that it's not happening. Because again, if it's not reported into teams, we just assume that it's not occurring. I mean, unless there's some kind of data entry issue, especially we see this a lot of times with post-secondary enrollment with colleges, where colleges do a good job of tracking students moving forward. So they know that they're coming from AEL because maybe they have a student identification number, a college identification number, and they're able to track them moving into services after they leave AEL. But that information is not coming back and being reported into teams. So it looks to us like there's no one entering into post-secondary enrollment where there could be. So it's an issue of really putting in a good tracking system for those individuals. MSG recorded and/or matched can be found in the MSG report. So this is great. Any of you doing quality assurance or performance accountability, you can easily go to this report, and it just doesn't have to be you. I mean, teachers can access this information also for their students in their classroom. Coordinators who are working with instructors can pull this information and have conversations with instructors and saying, hey, I see you have, you're serving 50 students, but maybe only 10% of them are achieving some kind of MSG. So that would be a very important conversation to have with instructors, because instructors may not always know what we're trying to achieve with the grant. And so, for them, it's like, we instruct and students come in and out of our class, but there's no clear goal of what needs to be achieved with this funding. So what happens if a participant exits and doesn't get a game? It's a lost opportunity. So, we talk a lot about keeping that period of participation going, because when you have people coming in and out, again, you may accumulate a lot of hours with them, but you never get around to post-testing them. And so in that situation, a person then leaves, you're not able to get them back, and that's a missed opportunity, but you're still on the hook for that. So what can you find in the MSG report? Just a reminder, you might go to the report and you're like, I know I have this person in my class. How come they're not showing up on the report? The first thing you might want to consider is, are they a participant yet? Because if they are not a participant, they will never show up on this report. You can see when they received a pre-test. So why is that important? Why is it important to know when they received a pre-test? Because if you're keeping track of their progress, it's very, very important to look back, one, to see how many hours they're accumulated. Are they ready to progress test? Or maybe they're ready for an opportunity to go into an IET or something like that. But you also want to see what the intensity of the service is. You want to see how long is it taking you to accumulate so many hours from the first time they initially were pre-tested. And the other thing you really might want to look at, we have conversations about this a lot in our department, is we can't see where those hours are being accumulated in terms of the learning. We don't know how many hours are they getting in math, in reading, in other areas that they're receiving service before they're progress tested. So what does that mean for you? So if you're seeing that we're testing people and they're not making progress, one of the issues might be, well, what kind of learning are they getting between the pre-test and the post-test? How much effort or intensity is being made in any one area? So if you're looking for them to make progress in math, but most of their learning may have been in reading, or maybe it's a combination of things. Maybe they just didn't get enough learning in math altogether. Maybe of the 40 hours, they got 10 hours in math, and then you progress tested them. That could be a good reason why they aren't making a game. But again, in teams, you can't see that. What is a participant's education and functioning level? So this will generally determine what class they're going to be put in. This is kind of what it's been used for in the past, but it's also a good opportunity to tailor their learning and their goal setting. Is a participant eligible for post-testing? So you can see how many hours they're accumulating, but again, not in what areas they're learning. What were the pre and post-test instruments for the participant? So really important, you cannot progress test with a different testing instrument that we use for pre-testing. It has to be the same type of test. So whether it's a TABE 1112 or a BEST Plus or a CASAS, you can't pre-test with CASAS and then try to post-test with TABE. So that's a situation a lot of times when individuals are going between different programs, or maybe a grant recipient changes their testing, what they're using for testing instruments mid-year, and everybody was on CASAS and now they're doing TABE 1112. You have to create a baseline with whatever test you're going to be using for post-testing. When a participant post-tested, did they make a gain? So important. If they're not post-testing, you want to see why. You don't want to continue to keep post-testing them and them not making gains. Even though they may be making an MSG, in another way, like Tara was giving the example with the person that was in the IET, we need to understand what's going on with their learning in the classroom. Are they getting enough rigor in terms of reading, writing, math for us to say that they're actually doing better academically? What type of gain has a participant achieved? So you can see the different types of gains, so that's good. What was the latest contact hour class for a participant? So for those of you who are coordinators or instructional leads, and you're working with your instructors or even career navigators, you're trying to identify what type of services are they getting? So one student may have multiple different classes, different instructors. Maybe the student isn't making a gain, and you want to be able to go back and talk to who's providing service to them. So the first instructor you probably talk to is the one they last had services with. You're going to look at what hours were accumulated there. You're going to want to look at, the intensity of services, all of those different things. Now, these things that I'm talking about, you should be maybe making note of, because these are things that you can be using for your QA and PA. We talked about other ways besides monitoring to really look at services and what can you build out and kind of getting in there and really helping the student to succeed and bettering services. So the latest contact hour class, good to go back and see, where the student was at and who they were working with. Okay, where to find the MSG reports? Much like the POP report is going to be under your reports, participants, and then it's the last option on the list, MSG report. Same thing as I showed you before, you're going to select the funding codes. Here you have the option of selecting the class if you would like to, and you can choose a report. So you have the 3 different options at the bottom: run report summary, run report extract, view report description. You're not going to have, it doesn't look like you have the option of selecting the dates here. And you also wouldn't be able to select for participant only, because this report only provides information for participants. So the MSG summary, again, gives you a high level of what's going on in terms of the participant, very basic information. And then you have the report extract, which I always recommend people using. It's going to give you all the detailed information that you're needing in terms of what types of MSGs did they achieve, did they post-test and not make a gain or make a gain, all of that information. The description, again, if you're new to this report, I would highly recommend pulling the extract and then pulling the report description and then going down each column, and it's going to give you the information that you're looking for. Now, these are just some areas of information that you can find and what it's telling you. You can look at whether a person needs a post-test, but the thing with this section here, it's only going to be saying they need a post-test if they haven't already made another type of MSG. So if they've already made another MSG, it's not going to tell you that they need a post-test. So that's one thing that we've found. Every time that a person has taken a pre-test, they will be listed on this MSG report. So an example of Goldie Hawn, she's taken multiple pre-tests, thankfully on the same day using TABE 11. So she's listed 3 times here so that you can see all of her reports in terms of what test she took and what content areas she was tested in. Not everybody gets tested in all areas. So why would that be? Well, you have sometimes people come in with TSI scores and they're showing maybe they only need help with math. So they would only be tested in math. So that's just an example. There's other situations where that occurs. So here, Susan Mendez might be an example. Well, maybe not. She's tested with the Best Plus. Not really sure why she only got tested in one area unless her tests are being staggered at this point when the data was pulled and the other tests weren't taken yet and entered. So that's an example of that. And then we see Tina here. She's taken the test 3 times or 4 times in different areas, but you can see that she has different grant recipients. So this came from our team's training environment. But in this case, Tina actually had been with 2 different grant recipients. So that's important too. It's good to see if people have jumped around to different service providers. And then you can see the educational functioning level.
Jeannie has a question. So if they had a workforce MSG, would they show there in that report?
Yes, so I'll get into that in a moment. What I want to do is in yellow, what you see, what I highlight is where you're going to find these MSGs. So we talked about the different options, but you need to know where to find them. That's the one thing. So here on column N, it doesn't tell you they made a gain in post-testing. It's titled as latest EFL earned date. So latest educational function level, that means they were able to move up when they progress tested. Now, if you have the situation where you have the spreadsheet and there's no date reported, but they were progress tested, that means they didn't move up, they didn't make a gain when it came to post-testing. So here, MSG type 1A achievement on a pre-post test will be found in column N. Your other MSGs will be found here in column S, column U, and column W and X. So let's start with column S. This is MSG type 2 achievement on a high school equivalency. So if you know for a fact that one of your participants have received their HSE, maybe it was a couple weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago, and it's not showing up, that's when you're definitely going to want to go back in and try to identify why, maybe not even why, but ask for proof that they've completed. You can either go to the TEA website and enter some information and get confirmation, or you can just get verification from the student in form of a document, and then that can be entered into Teams and you can get credit for that. Generally, it's matched on the back end, so you don't have to do that work, but there are situations where information isn't matched exactly, so the person will not show up as having completed an HSE. In column U, this is the post-secondary enrollment after exiting. If you have people here showing up, then that would mean they were enrolled into post-secondary after exiting. If you have people showing up, but that's not the case, it's probably because they're being entered because they're participating in an IUT, but they've been reported in their profile as having been enrolled into post-secondary. So in that case, that is not correct. They should not be showing up here just because they're in an IUT, because they're still enrolled in AEL. Now, the situation with why things may not be showing up, a lot of times goes back to what is your tracking. So for this column here, you have to enter it. It doesn't get matched on the back end. Generally, Teams, well, I'm not going to even say generally, Teams is not attached to the college system normally. So it wouldn't be attached to Banner or whatever you're using in your college system. So there's no way of getting that information matched automatically. So you need to have a follow-up process in place. If you have students on your campus that have student ID numbers, one thing that you could possibly do is work out something with the admissions department or the college and say, you know, can we get a report maybe once a quarter that can show, that can track any of the students that have went from AEL and are now participating in college classes. Then you would take that information. If you've identified people that have moved forward, they're no longer with AEL, you've identified them, they're enrolled into post-secondary, then you need to enter into Teams and you need to have some form of documentation. So maybe a college transcript or something showing their progress within the class, any of those things, and that would be kept as documentation for proof. Any questions on the post-secondary enrollment?
Jeannie's wanting clarification that if you said that if they have an MSG in another area, it would not show that they needed a post-test.
Right.
Right, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, if they've already gotten an MSG, so
Okay.
it's an MSG report, right? So the report is really looking at, did you achieve an MSG? The post-testing one, if they already received an MSG from what we're seeing, the last time I was looking at the report, it's not going to give you someone who got an MSG in another area. So kind of leaving that space open for you to progress test them to achieve an MSG.
She's asking, so if they got a workforce MSG, it won't show here needing an EFL.
I think it's for the educational functioning level ones only, not for the MSGs. And would you know, because I think it's only for the educational functioning levels. If you haven't received an MSG in those areas, then they're not going to show up on the post-testing one.
Jeannie's saying thank you. She has got it, but you know, if Ann wants to add anything, but.
Right, so remember, if you're trying to break it down, remember it this way. At this time, everybody that becomes a participant needs at least one educational functioning level MSG. Anybody that's in an IET need both. So if you're a participant unless you've achieved one of the three options for educational functioning, educational MSG, you're still on the hook for one. So in that case, if they're not looking like they need to be post-tested or progress tested, it's because they've already achieved one of the other options, either the high school HSC completion or the enrollment into post-secondary after exiting. But this is the problem. If you have them in an IET and you're putting them in as enrolled into post-secondary, it may look like they still don't need an MSG, but that information is incorrect. And that's where it comes to data integrity and quality assurance, and people need to go in and ensuring that that's not happening, that people aren't in an IET and you're getting credit for them being enrolled into a post-secondary. That needs to be corrected. MSGs type 3, 4, and 5. So here in V, where it says IET flag, what is this? What is this telling you? This is telling you that if a person is in IET, their class that they're in for an IET is attached to a training service. So some of this might be complicated for you who aren't in teams and who aren't setting these things up. But basically, training services is something that is set up aside or in addition to your training class, your contextualized learning class, your workforce preparation, which are the requirements of an IET. So you have these multiple components of an IET. They all show up in forms of a class. They need to be tied to a training service. When they're tied to a training service, all the participants that are in those classes, that are registered in those classes, will show up in the training service. And that's basically what V is saying. V is telling us that they are showing up in a training service because the class that they're in is tied to that training service. Now, types 3, 4, and 5, latest workforce achievement date, workforce type. So this is where if they're in an IET and you're getting credit for them, when you enter them in, when you enter the information into the profile, it's going to show up here. It's going to show up that because you make a selection of what type of MSG it is for an IET, and it's going to show when it was reported. So this is for anybody that you're entering information for them to get credit for type 3, 4, or 5. So that was a kind of really watered down version of the MSG report and what information you can find. The important thing is, where do we find the MSGs and what does it mean when I look at the column, especially like the training services one? I mean, it's not very apparent. It just says IET flag. Well, what does that mean? And I had, deeper dive in the explanation would tell you, but you kind of need to know what training services are and classes and all that. And that's a lot of information in setting up classes and all of those things. And this is, again, an introduction for most people.
So I do have there is a question about post-secondary enrollment before you go on. Can a student be logged as a post-secondary enrollment if they are receiving AEL program?
No. So if they're enrolled, IET, I mean, the idea is like, well, they're taking training with a college. Aren't they enrolled into post-secondary? Well, technically, yes, they are. But what we're looking for is they got enrolled not through the IET. They got enrolled because they're no longer with us and they've continued on and moved up into just being into college. That's what, for us, post-secondary enrollment means. So yes, I know it's confusing because you're like, yeah, but they're taking the training with the college, they're enrolled in college. Isn't that post-secondary enrollment? Not in this case. For us, that's training. What we're looking for is that they're continuing their education after they leave us. Does that make sense?
She says, yes. She's messaging me directly. So she said, yeah, there's some confusion out there with this but she's got it.
Okay, great. Yeah, I know it gets a little bit confusing sometimes with the whole IET stuff. And that's why we have these conversations over and over again. So where do you find more information on MSGs? If you're new to the game, if you want to try to wrap your head around some of these things, we do have a couple of webinars that break down the different types of MSGs. And if you click on the link that's under accountability, webinars and presentations, you'll be taken directly here to the TCAL website, and you can click on these videos, and hopefully it'll walk you through things, because you gotta hear it multiple times, and sometimes it gets a little bit overwhelming and just like too much information. So kind of pacing yourself and asking people questions, maybe people that are already doing the IETs. And I'm thinking about anybody that's new to the program, whether you're a director or a coordinator. It's important to know these things, even though you may not be doing it, this isn't your area that you're working in. It's still important to understand what this stuff is. And then education letter 0118, change 1, educational outcomes for adult education and literacy. This will give you a breakdown of the MSGs. This is a pretty thick letter too. So again, if you're trying to tackle this and you really want to really familiarize yourself with it, I would suggest, getting in contact with your program specialist saying, hey, can we walk through this? What is this telling me? Where would we apply this information? Because it's kind of like piecemeal, like, you're going to go in the letter and it's like one section that's going to be giving you what you need for whatever you're trying to answer. But you need to know what that information is answering. So we can help you kind of connect the dots in that situation. All right, so I created this little chart here because what we're finding is, one, not enough MSGs are being reported in teams, either because they're not happening or there's not a good system in place to collect the documentation and enter it into teams. So I was looking like, okay, what is a big issue here? I think the big issue is a lot of people don't understand what these MSGs are, whether it's the instructors, the coordinators. So there's not a whole lot of people jumping on board to ensure that this stuff gets in there, especially, with organizations you're trying to share information with. Like they have their own system of tracking students, and then we have our system, which is Teams. But again, they're not connected, so we need to wait a way to manually get that information and enter it. So MSG performance not being met, the information really needs to get to all levels of the organization, not just staying with the administrators. It needs to get to the subrecipients. It needs to get to the instructors. It needs to be understood of, what are we trying to accomplish here? So at the state level, we're trying to do a better job and providing it not just to the grant recipients, but making it more open and transparent, and giving these opportunities, doing Teacher Tuesdays, Manager Mondays, where people can get on board and hear what's being shared, and it starts to sink in a little bit more. For at the program level, it's highly recommended that, given an example, let's say we put out the AEL letter for MSGs, that there's a process in place that it's shared. It's shared with the staff, it's shared with the team, but there's a consensus of what it's being said. Because, we have this issue, we send stuff out. We don't know if you totally understand it. When you ask us questions, we can assist you, but, we send it out and we're like, okay, well, they must be fine because no one's answering questions. So really important that you have a process in place that the information is shared timely, but it's also implemented into what you all are doing from your day-to-day. It's not something that just gets set on the shelf, but a reminder, where can we find these things? And that's where I would recommend, with the AEL letters, anyone that's quality assurance or performance accountability and director, that what the AEL letters are and the different areas that you're continually needing support with that policy. So let's say you have the list, okay, well, I need to know where it talks about testing, where it talks about MSGs, career navigation, or HSC vouchers. And then you have a side column that clearly states where that information is, what AEL letter, and maybe as specifically what page, because that's going to help tremendously in navigating through this stuff. So there's other stuff here, MSG is not understood. MSG attainment has not been a team effort. Staying on track to goal attainment. I listed what is recommended. We can do at the state level because we can't do everything. We're not out in the field. We really rely on you to work together and share this information. And then what is a possible solution at the program level. So if you read to this chart, hopefully you can get some ideas. If you're not doing these things already, maybe you're doing all these things, I don't know, and things still aren't working. So then we need to decide, okay, what do we need to do differently? So let's go over a couple of questions. What is something you can learn by reviewing the MSG report? A, when a person exited. B, when a student became a participant. C, whether a participant made a gain after testing. Or D, how many students did not accumulate 12 hours?
Okay, getting lots of C's, mainly C's. That's all I see so far.
Okay, very good. So everything else you can find on the POP report. C is what you find on the MSG report. So what MSGs can you find on the MSG report for participants? A, enrollment into post-secondary after exiting. B, HSC completion. C, gain with post-testing. Or D, all of the above.
Okay, getting D's. Just D's.
Very good. All of the above. How many MSGs does each participant need? A, at least one every program year they are a participant. None. Whatever the program feels like doing. Or D, at least one HSC completion post-test with a gain and a post-secondary enrollment.
Ooh, we've got A and we got one D, a couple of D's actually. Mainly A's, but a couple of D's.
So the answer will be A. And the reason D is not the best answer, and maybe I need to make it clear, I should have said at least one of each. So you only really need to get one HSC of the different options you have. Now, it's not going to be a bad thing if you get more than one. So for example, they got their HSC completion, but you still decide to post-test them and they make a gain. As long as you get one MSG, you're good. But we're talking about quality here. So you have to look at why would you still want to progress test them if they've made a gain or if they completed their HSC? Well, let's say you want to now put them into an IET, but that IET is requiring a certain level of math. Now, for the IET, you've determined we're only taking these students that have this level of math. So that progress test, or if they haven't gotten already on their pre-test, would help them to be eligible. And we see this a lot of times with the boards. So with the boards, when they do their training opportunities, they go based on their educational levels. If they're not meeting a certain level of math, reading, or writing, that could potentially take them out altogether for a training opportunity. So it might be the same for you and how you've set up your IETs and things like that. So that would be a reason to continue to progress test them. But also it feels good for the student, if you're sharing those test scores with them and they're saying, wow, I'm actually doing better in math, I can actually see that. That is helpful to them. Okay, who is responsible for participants making a measurable skills gain? The director of the program, the instructor, the career navigator, or it is everyone's responsibility?
Oh, D's. Oh,
Not just the director. But in all reality, with these three options here, who has the knowledge about MSGs? That's really where the conversation should go. If it's everybody's responsibility, then who's really informed on what MSGs are and what their options are? I would say most of the time it's probably the director.
well, and then some people are saying B because the instructor has the most influence, perhaps.
True, but if the instructor doesn't even know what an MSG is, how can they enforce it? So this is where it's really important to evaluate what is the knowledge that the staff have on these things. And that might be also, something that you're doing for your quality assurance or your program accountability or program management, looking at how knowledgeable are my team members when it comes to some of these fundamental things related to the grant and performance. And you might be very, very, very surprised. Now, I know a lot of times the programs like to rely on the state and be like, well, attend this webinar or attend this PD. But really, if you are where you need to be in terms of understanding this information, and I'm talking about directors, quality assurance, program accountability people, you should be able to articulate and communicate this information to your team members. Because if you're waiting around for PD to show up or the train to us, I mean, how long has it taken for us to do a new director training? Gosh, 2 years? Well, a year and a half? I don't know, a long time. But you got staff that's coming in and out, and you really, really need to get them on board. You do not have the luxury to wait for us. So it's very, very important that, one, you assess how knowledgeable is my team? And if they're not, how do I get them knowledgeable? And then everybody can be responsible for making MSGs or contributing to the success of MSGs. But if they're not there yet, it's really hard to depend on them for that. Okay, any questions on this information?
No. Okay. Jody's asking, what about the performance based on each level of skill?
A performance based on each level of skill. So you're talking about, that's not an MSG right now.
Okay. She's saying like ABE begin level 1, ABE low intermediate.
In terms of the performance in those areas of learning? Oh, MSG, right, okay. So what are you asking exactly?
Okay, she says, is there a report that I could pull to determine if there was a gain and when it was, whether it was quarter 1 through 3 or quarter 4? Okay, yeah, is there a report that I can pull to determine if there was a gain and when it was obtained and whether it was quarter 1 through 3 or quarter 4?
So that would be the MSG report, and you can see, you know, what gain, what area they've made. If you're talking specifically about post-testing, you can see when they post-tested and that gain was made. For the other areas that I showed on the report, you can see that. But in terms of the MSGs for functioning levels, so what I'm thinking you're trying to articulate is when it comes to performance-based funding. So, you know, you have performance measure A and performance measure B. The A is going to be in relation to total enrollment. So usually, you know, making a certain making certain enrollment by a certain time in the program year. And usually it's like, I don't know, 33% or whatever it is by September, December. This year that was waived. But then you have the thing related to MSGs. So with MSGs, we're doing it, and it's all very, it's weedy in terms of how our Department of Operational Insight sets that up in figuring out what is the weighted percentage and for the total educational functioning levels. So basically you'll see all the functioning levels, right? And then there's going to be a certain percentage that you have to meet. In this case, for performance measure B, you had to meet a certain percentage. Every program was different. And the reason why it's different for every program is because you have a different number of people that fall into the denominator. And I'm trying to simplify this as much as possible. But yes, basically for every educational functioning level, we want to know how many of those individuals in that educational functioning level made an MSG. And there's a certain percentage for each of those areas. And then there's the weighted percentage, which is what you get your performance-based funding on. And what we're looking at is how many participants in all of those areas did you get for the first 2 quarters that made the MSG by the 3rd quarter? So that's where that would come into play. And I know
Okay.
a lot for some people because
Yeah, she says thank you, that she's got it. And that was a good question, though. Thanks.
Mhm.
Other people had that too.
Yeah. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope I answered some questions. Again, MSGs can be really, 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 really weedy, especially for new people. I just wanted to kind of give you surface level stuff. we're going to be doing the follow-up support. I believe this will be one of the areas we'll be going into. If you haven't already, please fill out that survey. I've sent it out several times in different emails. And then tomorrow we'll have our final training. It'll be for professional development, which Tika will be presenting. And then also we'll have Blanca from our team going over some Teams information. Now, don't expect a whole lot with Teams because there's a lot with Teams. She's going to be going over about an hour and a half to 2 hours of information, but useful information in regards to Teams. So we hope to see you there. And thank you so much for your participation today.